The first bill on the supplemental calendar for the day is House File 4746. The clerk will report the bill.
House File number 4746, an act relating to labor regulating transportation network companies.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, the author of the bill, Representative Hassan, to explain the bill. Would you like to proceed to your first amendment?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That's my motion.
There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Hassan moves to amend House File number 4746, the second engrossment. The amendment is coded A24-0360.
Representative Hassan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, the amendment before you is the agreed language from the TNC's driver advocates, the House, the Senate, as well as the governor's office. So what we have agreed on is, number one, the rates. So we set the rates $1.27 per mile and 31 cents per minute. We also, most of the change in the language is, majority of the language in the bill is the recommendation from the task force. So we agreed upon insurance, we agreed upon deactivation language, we agreed upon transparency in pay. The only outstanding thing that we didn't agree upon was the rate. And I am very thankful all the leaders coming together and the driver groups as well as the TNCs and agreeing upon this language to say that we do want Uber and Lyft to stay in the state of Minnesota because it's an important service that our communities need, but we also want to pay our drivers a fair wage and we want to avoid them to be exploited. So that's the language in front of you, Madam Speaker.
Discussion on the A24-0360 amendment. Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Torkelson moves to amend House File number 4746, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded JT-A27.
The member from Brown, Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Very simple amendment dealing with clean fuel standards, just getting rid of them, Madam Speaker. And as we know, this would put an undue burden not only on the entire transportation system, but even on the Uber drivers that have reached this settlement. We don't need to make the cost of doing business more expensive here in Minnesota at an inopportune moment in time, and I urge a green vote on this amendment.
Representative Long.
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
State your point of order.
Rule 3.21, motions and propositions must be germane. The minority had asked for an ability to debate the underlying bill, which we are giving them today, but this is introducing the Pollution Control Agency and a clean fuel standard, which is an entirely new topic from the underlying TNC bill.
Doesn't look super germane to me. I find the point of order well taken.
Madam Speaker, I appeal the ruling of the chair and I request a roll call.
Representative Torkelson appeals the ruling of the Speaker, requests a roll call. On the appeal, discussion on how this is germane to the bill. Representative Torkelson.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. There's really little doubt that fuel is required for at least the vast majority of cars that Uber drivers utilize. I haven't seen too many of them driving Teslas. There maybe are a few, but the vast majority use gasoline-powered cars. That fuel cost is going to directly impact their ability to make a profit as they go about their business. So I believe that this is absolutely germane to this very important bill. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Morrison, Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and Representative Torkelson for bringing this. You know, there really isn't much more. This is probably one of the single greatest things that we could do here in this body to ensure that the Uber and Lyft drivers and
Representative
others.
Schultz, The issue before the body is the appeal ruling, so you need to speak to germaneness. Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The reason this is germane is because the underlying bill is all about how the drivers who do such great work in our state need to be, they need more money in their pockets. And that is how this amendment is germane, because the clean fuel standard here in Minnesota stands kind of in opposition to drivers being able to keep more of their money. That is the premise, Madam Speaker, because we have seen results in other states and other places where we have seen the fuel prices rise. And one of the biggest ways, this is one of the biggest areas of inflationary cost increases. And we want drivers and Minnesotans to keep more of what they've earned. And especially in the last 4 years, we have seen gas prices go up more than a full $1. And the clean fuel standard is only going to add to another layer of burden, more costs for consumers, especially the consumers that are Uber and Lyft drivers, which is why this Torkelson amendment is within the bounds of germaneness today, and I encourage that we would appeal the ruling of the Speaker. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
A green or a yes vote agrees with the ruling of the Speaker. A red or a no vote opposes the ruling of the Speaker. The clerk will take the roll on the appeal.
So Carol's on the yes.
Will the clerk please call the name of the member participating remotely? Members, please take your conversations off of the House floor. Representative, or the clerk will call the name of the member participating remotely.
Carol.
Carol, aye.
Carol, aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 70 ayes and 60 nays, it is the judgment of the House that the decision of the Speaker shall stand. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Schultz moves to amend House File Number 4746, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A24-0360. No.
The member from Morrison, Representative Schultz.
Madam Speaker, I do have a lot of amendments at my desk right now, so I'm just trying to make sure that I'm getting to the right one, -036. Here we go.
There's another
The
code.
Schultz amendment, the code is JT-A25.
I have that one. I can speak to it,
Representative
Madam
Schultz, why don't we withdraw this one and do another one until people get it if they don't have it?
Madam Speaker, I would prefer not to withdraw this amendment.
We'll set it aside, you
That
know.
sounds like a
Give
better
people a
plan.
chance to read it.
I'm happy to table this for a discussion in a moment, if that works for you, Madam Speaker.
It's much more handy for you to just simply withdraw it at the moment and reoffer it later when folks have a copy of it.
I will follow your lead, Madam Speaker. Thank you. And withdraw this amendment temporarily.
Has this one gone out, the one you have up here?
Yes. We have this one now. Okay. I have that one. I have that one. What order you want these things in? So this is up. Okay. Yep. Representative Schultz withdraws the amendment that was just reported. There is an amendment at the desk.
Schultz moves to amend House File Number 4746, the second engrossment as amended, and the amendment is coded A29.
The member from Morrison to your A29 amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This amendment really is quite within the bounds here as we take a look at the language that we are debating today as it relates to transportation network companies. We want to ensure that that we're keeping Minnesotans and our drivers and their riders safe. And so what we have here is an amendment, the 829 amendment, to ensure that the Commissioner of Public Safety has some ability to take a look at this language and ensure that if this bill is to pass, that we ensure that this isn't going to increase the drunk driving rates here in Minnesota, Madam Speaker. And so that is the 829 amendment, just provides the Department of Public Safety and the Commissioner to have a little bit of additional oversight on this language and to ensure that our state roads remain safe for all Minnesotans, Madam Speaker. And I encourage support. And Madam Speaker, I would request a roll call.
Representative Schultz requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Hassan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In the spirit of agreeing with you, Rep. Schultz, I will accept this as a friendly amendment and say vote yes. Thank you.
Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I will withdraw my roll call request.
Representative Schultz withdraws the roll call request. All those in favor of the amendment, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There is an amendment at the desk.
Schultz moves to amend House File Number 4746, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded JT-A26.
The member from Morrison, Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Again, working a little bit from multiple copies of amendments at my desk. I know I have. Here we are. Got it. All right, Madam Speaker, as I am looking here at the 826 amendment, this is an important amendment for us. We have seen over the last few years that Minnesotans have had to deal with and work through the policies of people like Gavin Newsom and California standards over the way that, basically the car emission standards in our state, and brought to us especially by California to the great state of Minnesota. And we know that our climate is nowhere near what California's emission standards are and what our climate is, I should say, Madam Speaker. And so I'm bringing forward the 826 amendment today because this would remove those essential clean car prohibition. This is going to prohibit those standards that came from California within our state statute. And the key here, and the reason that this is important for us all, Madam Speaker, is because in Minnesota, we are not California. And the result of this policy currently on the books in Minnesota is going to result in higher costs for our transportation network drivers and their customers. The people of Minnesota are going to continue to see higher and higher costs to travel on things like Uber and Lyft and other businesses who choose to operate within the transportation network realm. This is incredibly important. I am so focused, and the Republicans in this body continue to be very focused upon making Minnesota more affordable for Minnesotans across the board. And this is one great big way that we can do that, recognizing that our first priority, Madam Speaker, amidst a time in our state where Minnesotans have seen inflation impact their families to the tune of about $28,000 a year of additional costs. This is something that we can do today, and before this legislature adjourns, this is something that we can do to make Minnesota more affordable. By adopting this 826 amendment to get this in this bill that appears to be on its way through this legislature and to be signed by the governor. This is a critically important thing because, like I said, Minnesotans want more of their money. They work so hard each and every day. And this bill, this amendment, this 826 amendment, would really assist us in making Minnesota and both the cost of our vehicles and our fuel to be more affordable. And so that is why I'm requesting support of the A26 amendment, Madam Speaker, and I would like a roll call.
Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Discussion to the amendment.
Point of order.
Majority Leader Long, state your point of order.
Madam Speaker, Rule 3.21, motions and propositions must be germane. This isn't even really trying. It's talking about the Pollution Control Agency, which is not in the underlying bill. So I'm sure glad we allowed such a substantive debate on Uber and Lyft at the request of the minority last night.
Advice, Madam Speaker?
I have studied the amendment, and I have reviewed the bill, and I considered your point of order well taken.
Madam Speaker.
Representative Schultz.
Madam Speaker, I appeal the ruling of the Speaker and I request a roll call.
Representative Schultz appeals the ruling of the Speaker and requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This underlying bill that we are working from today is all about ensuring that the drivers for our transportation network companies, that they have more money in their pockets. And this is a critically important amendment that would do exactly that, Madam Speaker. At the end of the day, if nothing else happens, we want to make Minnesota more affordable. And we want the transportation network company drivers to have more money in their pockets for their families. The increased taxes that we have seen in our state have really worked against the drivers. It's no wonder to me. It is no wonder to me that they come to this legislature or to the Minneapolis City Council and ask for more money. It's no wonder when they have seen the taxes continue to be increased in this state, additional burdens and regulations.
Representative Long, state your point of order.
Masons 101, we are on the appeal of the ruling of the Speaker, and we should be talking about germaneness.
I will just remind the body that the question before the body is whether the decision of the Speaker on germaneness should stand. Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yes, once again, I'm appealing to the body here with the opportunity for you all to help put more money back in the pockets of the drivers of these transportation network companies. That is what this amendment is about, putting more money back in their pockets. And that is why this is exactly germane to this underlying bill, and it's a reason that the entire body should be standing with the Republicans today to help make Minnesota more affordable.
The member from Carver, Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And last night we stood here and I brought the majority leader down a line of questioning, and he said, oh, of course, we're going to have a good conversation. We'll have full-throated conversation. There'll be an opportunity for amendments. There'll be an opportunity for questions to get asked. And in the course of a normal committee hearing, we do hear things like this that get brought when a bill that we're trying to figure out how we're going to react to is brought before committee. And I can't imagine why we would not go down the road of entertaining Representative Schultz's thoughts, questions here.
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
Majority Leader Long, state your point of order.
Masons 101, we need to be discussing the germaneness and the appeal of the ruling of the Speaker, not whether we or not we should be doing the underlying amendment.
Representative Nash, please speak to the appeal.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm just taking the majority leader at his word, which I had hoped was good, but we were told that we would get to have debate. And we were told that we would get to entertain amendments. We were told that there would be full-throated conversation. I'm just trying to figure out if the majority leader was actually giving us his word or just placating us until we sat down and were quiet. Thank you.
The member from Anoka, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. And thank you, Representative Schultz, for this amendment. It is incredibly germane because it goes directly to the very issue, all the economics of the very issue that has held up this bill until today, the very last day of session. Members, the reason why TNC drivers and the rideshare companies have been at this negotiation for so long is they're trying to strike the exact right economic point where drivers can get paid a certain rate and where the prices that the TNC companies have to charge their customers doesn't rise to the point where demand is destroyed. And one of the most important, maybe the most important input into that economic equation are the fuel costs that go into the folks who are the drivers, the cars that are serving the TNC companies, whether we're talking about Uber or Lyft. So it's absolutely essential that we take up the Schultz Amendment in order to make those economics work. The only way we make those economics work is if we don't follow down the destructive path of California, the California fuel standards, which are going to cause fuel prices for everyone in Minnesota to rise, but in particular for Uber drivers and Lyft drivers, which would cause the prices of Uber and Lyft to rise.
Madam Speaker.
To the point in which...
Point of order.
Representative Pinto, state your point of order.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would you please remind the member to stick to the issue of germaneness? It's not the content, it's not the result, it's simply the germaneness, how this is germane to the underlying bill. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Yes, I will remind Representative Niska that the issue is germaneness and we're under the appeal of the ruling. Please keep your comments to that.
Thank you, Your Honor. I perhaps Representative Pinto...
I've not been called that before.
Not yet, not yet. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Only work on a couple hours of sleep here, Madam Speaker. Thank you. Perhaps soon. Thank you, Madam Speaker. And perhaps Representative Pinto was not listening very carefully to the explanation of why this is germane. This is germane to the fundamental economic equation at the heart of the bill. The fundamental economic equation at the heart of the bill is what is the price that can be set for the contractual relationship between the TNC companies and the drivers that maximizes the wages, the payments that those drivers can receive, while also not destroying the TNC business. And so, of course, that fuel input is incredibly germane. It is fundamental to making this bill work. And so, of course, we should overturn the ruling of the Speaker and find that the amendment is germane.
The member from Itasca, Representative Igo.
Madam Speaker and members, to the germaneness of this amendment, the whole point of this bill in front of us is to make sure that we can have drivers in TNC networks that are able to profit and make a living doing what they're doing. The amendment offered by Representative Schultz in front of us is taking that a step further inside of that to make sure that they're going to be able to afford the gas and vehicles to be able to provide that service, henceforth making this completely germane to the bill in front of us. So if we're going to accomplish what's actually in front of us in this bill language, which is to be looking out for the drivers, we should also be looking out for their vehicles and the fuel that they put in those vehicles. This is 100% germane. I think we should find the Speaker out of order on this, and we should be accepting this amendment.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Nadeau.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, this is germane. The rule for germaneness is that the amendment doesn't substantially change or expand the scope or purpose of the bill. And this amendment doesn't do that. Will the amendment require a major change in the title of the bill? And the answer is no. Is the amendment being made in the same chapter? That's not necessarily the case. It's not necessary to be germane. Does the amendment introduce an independent question? And the answer is no. And Representative Niska hits this on the head because this goes to the fundamental economic equation to this bill. It is germane. We can argue about germaneness all day, but let's debate the merits of this. Let's oppose the ruling of the Speaker, and let's move on to discuss the bill. Thank you, members.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and advice to the body. If you've been here long enough, you'll realize that when advice is being given about germaneness, it is important to understand the perspective of which is being presented and explaining why it is germane in that member's opinion should not be objected to because we're trying to understand each other's perspective to make the best decision. We as a body decide germaneness. And let us decide as a body, and if we have a large enough group of members that disagree with the decision of germaneness, it is our right to bring it to the whole body. So anyone that may have ignored the discussion of why it's germane, the reason why, you need to not ignore, but to understand why we feel the core intent. And I talked to drivers yesterday, and their intent—
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
Majority Leader Long, for what purpose do you rise?
Masons 101, I don't think that conversations with drivers have any bearing on the germaneness of the underlying amendment.
Please keep your comments to the appeal on germaneness. Representative
Madam Speaker,
Quam.
point of order.
Representative New Burnley, state your point of order.
Masons 61, interruptions actually need to be made in good faith. Deleterious points of order are not appropriate for debate.
Representative Quam, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I am shocked because I have heard just about every member talk about their constituents speaking to them, things brought to them by the public, and to stand up and say it's not important what citizens and people of the state of Minnesota tell me is extremely inappropriate. And it takes up more time. So let us focus on the matter of germaneness and take into account the reasoning in the decision before we vote. So I believe this amendment is germane, and let us override the ruling of the Speaker.
The member from Traverse, Representative Backer.
Yeah, Madam Speaker and members of Vice, this amendment, I know I'll be sounding like others, but is germane because it addresses the same subject and is relevant to our bill that's on the floor. It's that simple. Two simple points, folks. It addresses the same subject. It's relevant. I would hope that we can overrule the Speaker. I know people are pushing this through, but if this body does not follow its own rules, then shame on us. Thank you, members.
The member from Anoka, Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, line 10.23 of the DE, under the subheading, or under the heading, minimum compensation, on line 2.223, $1.28 per mile. This is absolutely germane. This is one of the reasons it took so long to reach an agreement, is what will be the reimbursement for mileage. That's directly related to what the drivers pay for gas. You think if this might change if the price of gas goes up to $5 or $6 a gallon due to California standards and our fuel? This is absolutely germane. Vote against the Speaker.
The member from Chisago, Representative New Burnley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And on this point of germaneness, you know, it's interesting. We keep being told by the majority party that we've allowed debate. We've been afforded discussion as though the majority party has bestowed some generous, unique, benevolent gift upon us. Debate and discussion is what we do here. It is not your gift to us. It is our responsibility to our constituents. That is what we are doing here. On the point of germaneness, what we have for the title of the bill is Transportation Network Financial Responsibility. So thank you, Representative Schultz, for trying to add some financial responsibility. Because if there is one thing we know about these California standards, it's that they are going to destroy us economically. And that includes our Uber and Lyft drivers.
Majority Leader Long, for what purpose do you rise?
Masons 101, the effect of the underlying amendment is not what we are discussing. We are discussing the germaneness, and I would ask that you please remind members to focus on germane.
Representative New Burnley, please keep your comments to the appeal of the ruling of the Speaker on germaneness. Representative New Burnley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And again, the title is Transportation Network Financial Responsibility, and we are talking about financial responsibility. So I'm sorry that folks are uptight this morning and don't want to debate this. And so you continue to interrupt us with silly points of order. But the reality is the A26 amendment exactly addresses transportation network financial responsibility. We know that adopting these California car standards are going to make driving for Uber and Lyft more expensive for drivers. We know that. That is not in question. That is not debatable, frankly. And therefore, it is clearly relevant, it is clearly germane to the transportation network financial responsibility. That's what we are talking about. Of course this is germane to the bill, and let's be clear. This Uber Lyft language, frankly, there should be a pretty dang wide strike zone on a DE that shows up 20 minutes ago? On a DE that shows up 20 minutes ago? I mean, we were waiting all morning for it. We were told to be here at 9. A DE that shows up 20 minutes ago? I sure hope there's a decent strike zone on a bill that shows up after being constructed in the dark of night. So I hope that when we are considering, and thank you, Representative Nadeau, for bringing it out, because we have some idea. I hope that we would use the broadest of terms when it comes to the strike zone on a bill that showed up 20 minutes ago and not a member of our body has been able to see. And certainly when we're talking about financial responsibility, we should discuss the fact that this language is likely to be outdated very quickly with these California car standards. The idea that you believe you are providing adequately for these drivers is likely to be outdated as soon as these California car standards are fully implemented. So then what happens? Do we have this fight year after year after year after year? Does the legislature continue to be the arbiter of labor standards and labor negotiations? Of course, the California car standards are relevant to this bill. This is about providing financial stability for Uber and Lyft drivers, for transportation network companies. That's what it's about. Members, if you're going to be honest, if you're going to actually allow debate and afford discussion so kindly and benevolently to us, well, then let's do that. Let's have the debate, let's have the discussion on a bill that showed up 20 minutes ago. Let's have the debate, let's have the discussion about the actual amendment. It is clearly germane, and I hope the body is smart enough to find it that way.
The member from Clay, Representative Joy.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, this is definitely germane to the bill. I have a hard time understanding where this is not. As we heard last night, and I know it's late for us and we didn't get much sleep, but we heard last night that negotiations were made and a deal was reached with Uber Lyft. And the deal was reached in Minnesota, not in California standards. Right now, gas in California is $1.50 higher because of their California standards. $1.50. A lot of that is tax. Understand, Uber and Lyft drivers, you accepted Minnesota standards. Are we going to have to continue to negotiate on this floor every year because of what we're doing? They're going to lose less and less margin on the rates they negotiated because we're going off of California standards in this bill. This is absolutely germane to this. They don't want to see $4.79 a gallon when we're $3.29 average right now. This is going to affect the pumps. And it's not going to be a floating cost that hits us at 8 o'clock, noon, or 4 o'clock. It's going to hit us on the gas tax right away. It's going to be a fixed cost right into the pumps. And they're going to see this. And then they're going to come back. They said it. We heard it many times when that door was open. We want fair pay and we want it now. So this is actually germane to the bill. This is something we need to put into this bill. And I appreciate it, Representative Schultz, for this. Thank you.
Member from Asante, Representative Johnson.
Madam Speaker, members, how is this germane? This is germane because these California standards affect Minnesota. We have no say. This legislature, the citizens of Minnesota have no say what our standards are. It's a government, it's legislature in California telling us what we're going to do. Nobody from Minnesota votes for them. And how is this germane? Because it affects those drivers of the TNCs financially. Never before that I'm aware of have we ever set their pay rate in the bill. They can't renegotiate. They have to come to the legislature to change that. So this is germane because it affects the rates and the expenses of the TNC drivers. Who knows what California is going to do next? We don't. We don't know how it's going to affect our economy, our fuel prices for our cars, how cost of our cars because of what they require. We have no say in that. Members, overturn the ruling of the Speaker.
The member from Crow Wing, Representative Heinzman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And members, I too would speak to germaneness. And Representative Brindley actually brought up, I think, a great argument. This title really encompasses the issue and why we're rising today to speak to germaneness. As I think, Madam Speaker, you made a mistake, and I hope the body will overrule your initial ruling after hearing more information. The title of the underlying bill is this Transportation Network Financial Responsibility. Well, members, Representative Schultz's amendment gets at, I think, a very significant cost increase for the drivers that are being directly affected by the language in the underlying bill. And just to put some belt and suspenders on this, these new rules, these California emission standards that have been brought to Minnesota by Democrats, slated to become implemented next year, are expected to raise the costs of vehicles, not just vehicles for industry and businesses and individuals, but all vehicles by as much as $2,500. I don't know, I haven't gone through all of the numbers, but it would be interesting to see what the underlying bill is projected to actually produce for those drivers. What is the increase, the expected increase in income? Because I wouldn't be too surprised if there's a lot of drivers out there whose increase in income is completely consumed by the increased costs
to those drivers because of the California emission standards causing their vehicle prices to skyrocket. That's why we're debating the germaneness of the bill. And Madam Speaker, I think you made a mistake, and I hope that, like I said, that the body overturns your decision, because if we really are talking about transportation network financial responsibility, it would be the responsible thing to adopt the Schultz amendment if given the opportunity to debate it and further discuss the impact of Representative Schultz's amendment. I think maybe, Madam Speaker, there's a couple of different approaches that one party or group in the body may be looking at to try to help drivers. One might be to simply force companies to increase reimbursement rates. Another might be like what's being proposed in the Schultz amendment, that we're not allowed to debate. We have to discuss germaneness, but I think it's important to point out that saving drivers from having to be subjected to a potentially $2,500 increase in the cost of a vehicle puts money, if we were to adopt the Schultz amendment, given the opportunity to debate it and discuss it, would put that money right back in the pockets of drivers who have to replace vehicles, which is an ongoing thing. Obviously, you know, you're on the road 24/7, putting in those kinds of hours, you're going to wear out a car pretty quick. So I think it only makes sense that we should overturn the ruling of the Speaker. Members, this is really, I think, timely that we have this conversation right now, because like I said, these new California emission standards, like I said, the Democrats have brought to Minnesota, those cost increases are right around the corner, soon to be implemented. And maybe members don't know how this is going to work, but we're gonna, I don't know, I'm going to say it's a little misguided, but we're going to imply or suggest to Minnesotans that the standards that California has adopted in a a warm climate would apply to, or should be brought here to, a cool, cold climate? I just don't think that makes any sense. So I would appeal the body that we would overturn the ruling of the Speaker.
Members, the question before the body is, shall the decision of the Speaker stand as the judgment of the House? A yes or green vote supports the ruling of the Speaker. A no or red vote goes against the ruling of the Speaker. The clerk will take the roll. Members, please vote. Will the clerk please call the names of the members participating remotely?
Carroll.
Carroll, aye.
Carroll, aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 70 ayes and 59 nays, it is the judgment of the House that the decision of the Speaker shall stand. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Garofalo moves to amend House File Number 4746. The second and Grossman as amended. The amendment is coded A31.
The member from Dakota, Representative Garofalo, to your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, members. And first, before I introduce the amendment, I just wanted to make a very quick announcement. And this blatantly violates the rules, but it's my last day, so I don't care. Whatever. So, yesterday...
You might be called out of order. Just be careful.
You'll see where I'm going. I think you'll be cool with it. But again, it's my last day. I don't care. Whatever. So, Madam Speaker and
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thought my former friend Liz Olson, I thought was going to wave around that damn coffee mug again or something like that. So thank you. But Madam Speaker, members, I appreciate the body's indulgence. You'll see where I'm going with this in a minute. Yesterday in North Carolina, a young gentleman by the name of Max Somerville asked my wife Julie and I's daughter Abigail Garofalo to spend the rest of their life together in marriage. And well, hold on, don't applaud yet. You don't know what she said. So no, but on behalf of Julie and I and our entire family, I just want to say congratulations to Mac and Abby. We're very happy to have you join our family. This is a big day for you. I know that you love Abby very much. Abby, I know you love Mac. To the entire Good family, we are very thankful to be spending time together with you. Do not steal our daughter and take her to North Carolina with you. Do not do that. We want to keep them in Minnesota. But on behalf of our entire family, Mac and Abby, I know you're watching. Congratulations and thank you. So no point of order yet, Madam Speaker. We're rolling. Pivoting to the issue before us, what you see before us today, members, this is a deletion, so I don't think there's any germaneness problems. This amendment deletes a section of the bill, and I would encourage members to go to the delete all and find this section of the bill. Members, Minnesota has an epidemic. You could call it a statewide pandemic of nonprofit fraud. Okay? If you look in the bill written right now, the subdivision that this amendment deletes, you will see that the rideshare companies in the state of Minnesota under this bill must, not may, they may not choose, they are forced to partner with nonprofits in the state of Minnesota. And there's very prescriptive language about the nonprofits that the riders of Uber, Lyft, and other rideshare companies will be forced to partner with. Now, what private businesses do, who they choose to partner with, that's their business, okay? But right now in this bill, it is being mandated that they partner with nonprofits. And right now, based on the publicly available information we have, we know that rideshare right now is partnered with the Somali Community Resettlement Services. That's what's happening right now. And it is publicly available information that that agency, that group, that nonprofit has been linked to the largest COVID fraud in the nation. Okay, this is not Pat Garofalo saying it. This is the U.S. Attorney's Office. Okay, this is what is happening right now. We also know that in this bill, I do not know whether Lyft is currently partnered with them or not, but MALDA, the individuals who were up here lobbying for these things, for the items, some of these items in the bill, they are we're partnering with Lyft. That's publicly available information. So as Minnesota faces what has truly become, and I don't think there's much of a dispute anymore over this. There used to be denial that this was happening. Minnesota has an epidemic of nonprofit corruption and fraud in the state of Minnesota. And these are federally documented in federal court cases. This bill right now is mandating that rideshare companies be forced to partner with nonprofits with very specific criteria in there. It's not like any nonprofit is going to be eligible to do this. It is very specifically written in there. And so, members, I would hope, regardless of your views of the good or bad things in this bill, I would say I want to thank those who have been working tirelessly on behalf of the rideshare services, those in the government affairs community specifically. No doubt, Uber and Lyft are amazing American companies. And they're doing a fantastic job saving lives, saving money, providing more freedom and flexibility to individuals. They've done just an amazing job leveraging technology. And their promise for the future, integrating autonomous driving, is going to be, it's a bright future. It's pretty cool, okay? I am very happy about the sections of this bill that allow the state of Minnesota to insulate itself from the Minneapolis City Council's decisions. I think that's a good thing. But on this matter, members, I would hope that we can join together and recognize the deep concerns every member should have about what has been public sector financing of fraud of nonprofits being pivoted to private sector mandated fraud. Okay? The rideshare companies in the state of Minnesota, under the provision of this bill, will have no choice. No choice. The word is must. And I would ask members to support my amendment, and I would request a roll call on the A31 amendment.
A roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. The member from Hennepin, Representative Hassan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Garofalo, congratulations to your daughter and your family. I know that you are very happy today because in this bill we are preempting the city of Minneapolis, and that has been a goal for you before you retire, so congratulations on that one too. For this amendment, as you know, we have been working with the TNCs and all the advocacy groups for 2 years. And even though the language says must, the TNCs have agreed on this language. Everything on this bill is something that has been agreed by all parties involved and all stakeholders. So I would ask members to vote no on the Garofalo amendment, and let's move on and let's get this bill passed today.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. If you have attended, watched, or listened to the Audit Commission, you have seen repeated occasions across multiple areas where entities have committed fraud. And in fact, it's not hard to find. So to think that we would have in a bill a requirement to actually be forced to only work with an entity that Representative Garofalo has already stated is connected with fraud is malfeasance. We should not do malfeasance. We should prevent that by voting yes for this amendment.
The member from Chisago, Representative New Brindley. She's running.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I had to make sure that I heard that correctly. So I was just verifying that, yes, this is happening right now. Uber and Lyft have chosen to do this already as an olive branch to their drivers, right? They are already contracting with the Somali Community Resettlement Services, and they're doing that as an olive branch to their drivers, not because they have to, but because they actually, this is evidence actually of the good faith effort that Uber and Lyft have been making already to support their drivers. Now, I was quite alarmed. I actually did not know this, and so thank you, Representative Garofalo, for pointing this out, because I was not aware, actually, that they were already contracting with the Somali Community Resettlement Services, and a nonprofit organization that has known ties to the Feeding Our Future fraud. Known ties to the Feeding Our Future fraud. When that fraud started, when this was first reported, it was around $250 million. Now reports are at least $500 million of fraud. And when I say fraud, what I actually mean is theft. $500 million of taxpayer money stolen by nonprofits to, well, some of the things reported by luxury cars, by palatial homes, all kinds of things. That's what this money was going for. $500 million that was intended to feed children went in the pockets of thieves. And the fact, you say, well, this was agreed to by all parties. It wasn't agreed to by my constituents, because I guarantee my constituents are going to be pissed off that we say they must contract with another nonprofit. And when are we going to find the fraud here? Must. And what's going to be the cost to consumers for this fraud? What is going to be the cost to consumers? Because we have seen it over and over and over again. This amendment should literally be titled the Anti-Fraud Amendment. That's what this amendment should be titled. This is the Anti-Fraud Amendment. In addition to that, it's completely unnecessary. Because as long as Uber and Lyft find these folks to be good actors, they have clearly already done this. But if they discover fraud in these nonprofits, and perhaps there isn't a darn one available without ties to fraud, well, then what do these transportation network companies do? Well, their hands are tied. You must contract with a driver advocacy organization. And frankly, when I look at that language, with a driver's advocacy organization, I don't know, Democrats come up with nonprofits for everything under the sun, but this is pretty niche. This is pretty niche, a driver's advocacy organization. I can't imagine that Uber and Lyft have a lengthy list to choose from. So their hands are going to be tied regardless of whether or not these nonprofits are found to be fraudulent. I just don't understand at what point are we going to learn our lesson that we have some responsibility. I suppose maybe you don't care on this one because it's not directly taxpayer money. It's not directly taxpayer money. It's just our constituents' money that is going to be forced to pay. Which is why when you say, well, it's agreed to by all parties, not this party. Not this party. This party had nothing to do with these negotiations. Nothing. This party had nothing to do with these negotiations, and it is not agreed to. It is absolutely not agreed to. And the fact that we would have language in this bill requiring contracting with any nonprofit is enormously problematic. The A31 is the Anti-Fraud Amendment. This is the Anti-Fraud Amendment. Madam Speaker, was there a roll call requested on this amendment?
There is a roll call.
Excellent, thank you. Because I for sure think we should be on the record as being opposed to fraud and to ensuring that rideshare companies that currently do this already have the autonomy to say, ooh, holy cow, this is a bad actor, I'm out. They should have that autonomy. They absolutely should have that autonomy. And again, they're doing this now. They do this in good faith already. But they should have the autonomy to not engage with a fraudulent organization if that's what they discover. This is the Anti-Fraud Amendment. Vote yes.
Member from Anoka, Representative Ingan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. We all know that the state of Minnesota under DFL governance doesn't have the greatest track record when it comes to not funding fraudulent organizations. We've seen quite a few instances that Representative Garofalo brought up earlier, and I'm going to read one here right now. I'll have it passed out on the floor for you guys. But this is from the Minnesota Reformer just a few weeks ago, April 23rd of 2024. The Somali resettlement nonprofit gets about $500,000 from the state annually. DFL lawmaker withdraws bills giving millions to nonprofit mentioned in Feeding Our Future case. The article goes on to say that the Somali Community Resettlement Services operated several food distribution sites in 2020 and 2021, but its leaders have not been charged with a crime yet. Federal prosecutors repeatedly mentioned those sites and evidence that this could be used in the first trial in what has become known as the Feeding Our Future scandal. We are mandating that a private business must contract with a nonprofit that is tied to millions in fraud. And I heard Representative Hassan mention that the TNC companies have agreed to work with them. If that's the case, if they have agreed to work with them, why do we need a state mandate that all TNC companies who operate under these provisions must also do so? We just want to make sure that that fraud keeps getting funded a little bit more, don't we? It's wrong to not support the Garofalo amendment because it is telling the constituents that we work for that their tax dollars, they don't matter. That they should, instead of funding the services that we can fund here in the state, roads, bridges, infrastructure, schools, you name it, it should instead go towards nonprofits linked directly to the largest fraud scandals that this state has ever seen. Vote green on the Garofalo amendment. Thank you.
The member from Wright, Representative Hudson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's awfully curious, and I do enjoy it, and I'm frustrated by it, the way that we use language around here sometimes. Words like negotiate. This was negotiated. Words like agree. This was agreed upon by the parties. You know, it's widely understood that an agreement that is made under duress is not a legitimate agreement. If I were to walk into the headquarters of Uber or Lyft and pull out a weapon and point it at the head of whoever was in the office and demand lifetime rideshare, lifetime rides, or a special rate, or whatever my demand was, and they agreed, the parties agreed under those circumstances to my terms, that would not be recognized as a legitimate negotiation. Why? Because coercion is involved. Uber and Lyft have been operating under a position of duress, coerced by the Minneapolis City Council into making their business model unworkable for months. And even within these walls, even within this house, yesterday, it was utterly fascinating. I'll tell you what, being here, first term in the legislature, getting a front row seat to behind the scenes, behind the headlines, getting to see how things actually work compared to how they're communicated to the public. There's a press conference last night at 10 o'clock at night announcing this agreement, this negotiation. And it was presented as if there was nothing remarkable about it. This is just how the process works. Totally normal. Now, those of us who work here, everyone in this room, was well aware of the fact that for the entire day, the second to last day of session, the other body, the upper chamber, as they like to regard themselves, was in recess, not doing their work. And I'm trying to figure out how to negotiate this, how to communicate what the public doesn't know within the scope of our rules. But suffice it to say, let's put it this way. Do you honestly think that if the Senate could have been doing their job yesterday, that they wouldn't have? You think they just wanted a day off? You think they just wanted some patio time? No, they weren't able to do their work because they were operating under duress. And so at 10 o'clock, we get this announcement of, we have an agreement all of a sudden. We have a negotiation that we've worked out. This whole process has been a product of coercion, and we're uniquely empowered to do that as government, because the example I referred to earlier, the hypothetical that we're so averse to in this chamber, I would be arrested if I walked into the officers of Uber and Lyft and used coercion, pointed a gun at somebody's head, and tried to negotiate what I wanted. I'm not empowered to do that as a private citizen, but government is. Government has a monopoly on force. And every time we legislate, every law we write is an exercise in how we utilize that unique capacity to force people to do things. Force them to hand over their money, force them to live their lives in certain ways, bar them from certain behavior, mandate others. We have a unique responsibility to bear the weapon of government force responsibly. So when you tell me that Uber and Lyft agreed to this, they agreed to be forced under this law, under this bill, to contract with a nonprofit with no doubt very thoroughly contemplated specific qualifications that narrow the field of possibility down to a certain target list. I simply do not accept the legitimacy of that negotiation. Their business was threatened, just as this legislature was threatened yesterday through the antics over in the other chamber. An agreement made under duress is not an agreement. We should support the Garofalo amendment. Thank you.
The member from Goodhue, Representative Altendorf.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, members. This is really, being a first-term member, this is really quite the session that we've experienced the last 2 years. Last year, if I can bring you back, this body, the Minnesota State Legislature, we approved $1.1 billion to nonprofits. $1.1 billion. And so I thank Representative Garofalo for bringing this amendment to the floor. As he stated, we have a problem here in Minnesota. And this is well known. This is well known, folks. In fact, it rose to the occasion that in September of 2022, the Feeding Our Future fraud in Minnesota was so big. It was the biggest COVID scheme, money funneling scheme. Minnesota, we have that record. And yet, the charges came federally because no one here in Minnesota is paying attention to the fraud. As the Minnesota citizens suffer from high inflation, high gas prices, high groceries, I do think it's appropriate for the Minnesotans to wonder who is paying attention to what's happening in Minnesota and to the fraud. With this so-called trifecta, the Democrats have control of the governor, the Senate, the House, the AG. It's like the kids are trapped in the candy store and there's no adult in there to stop them. The fraud here in Minnesota just continues over and over. The Minnesota Democrats are funding their own fraud. They're funding the nonprofits. And now here in this bill, the Uber Lyft bill, which let's just take a moment to realize this happened back in March. Back in March, we knew that there was a problem with Uber and Lyft potentially leaving Minneapolis and then Minnesota. And here we are today, taking time of the last day that we can vote this session, discussing a problem that could have been fixed weeks ago, at least days ago, not now, not in the final moments of the session. For those in the public who don't know, the Senate was basically held in almost a hostage situation. They were in recess all day. The Senate wasn't even functioning yesterday with 2 days left of the legislation to go. 2 days left. This is misplaced priorities and a complete failure of this trifecta to be able to lead the state of Minnesota. In 2023, we know you can do it. We saw bill after bill after bill coming through the 2023 session, week after week. And you had us here late nights, all session long. In 2024, so that the public is aware, when these bills, when later it's blamed on the Republicans or we tried to debate, well, this could have been done all session long, members. All session long. I came in session after session on the floor and I wondered, what are we doing here? It would be a paper push and you would send us home. You created the logjam. You created the problem. All of these bills coming through on the last day. And then we're just not supposed to pay attention in this Uber Lyft bill that we are now doing a must on a nonprofit connected to feeding our future. The largest scheme in America, the largest fraud in America from the COVID-19 dollars, it's connected to that. We need to have more of a debate on this. The nonprofits here in Minnesota are a huge problem, and someone needs to start being responsible for this, to have oversight, to make sure that the Minnesotans are not continually ripped off from this nonprofit scheme that's going on here in Minnesota. It's truly disgusting, and I thank you, Representative Garofalo, for offering this simple amendment. Let's do this. Let's tell Minnesotans that we are going to legislate responsibly, that we do care about fraud, that we are not picking winners and losers and sponsoring these nonprofits. Let's put an end to this money funneling system that's happening here in Minnesota.
The member from Traverse, Representative Becker.
Yeah, Madam Speaker and members, great amendment. This is a great amendment. Unfortunately, this is what we see here when there is total one-party control. You know, one of the things we as representatives for the state of Minnesota, it is our responsibility to team up with good partners. And when you team up with an organization that has stolen money from the purses and our wallets from my folks in 9A, that's shameful. The folks in 9A, which is Traverse and Grant County and some of Otter Tail and Wilkin County, they work hard for their money. They send the money down here to St. Paul to be used wisely to help folks. And when we have a bill that teams up with an organization with a history of fraud, history of abuse, history of disrespect to Minnesotans who work hard for their money, this is very troubling. When you see this type of fraud and you team up with this organization, this is why this amendment makes sense. Fraud erodes trust. So what we see is we see taxpayers like saying, hey, why in the Sam heck are the state of Minnesota teaming up with a bad player? Why continue to suffer these large losses? $500 million. $500 million. It's absurd. This is why my folks are so up in arms. This money comes hard to them, and then we redistribute it to fraud, waste, and abuse. Under one-party control, we have irresponsibility, makes living in Minnesota unaffordable. I'm supporting this amendment because not supporting this amendment would continue to erode the reputation of our fine state of Minnesota. Thank you, members.
The member for Martin, Representative Olson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, fraud, waste, and abuse is something that we absolutely have a responsibility to keep an eye out for, to curtail and try and reduce to the best of our ability. It's taxpayer dollars that we are utilizing in every transaction that occurs here in the state of Minnesota's government. Now, a number of weeks ago, we had 2 bills returned to the author from this House, and I was looking at that and I said, wow, this is really good. This is the responsible thing to do. We are pulling back. We are not going to fund fraud in this state. We are moving in the right direction. Now, we did that a number of weeks ago, and I had some hope. And then we see through the language in this DE that we're not actually getting rid of fraud. We're just providing fraud a back door. We're saying taxpayer dollars maybe won't go towards funding fraud, but we'll create an avenue in which fraud can be perpetuated through the alleyway, through the back door. We're saying an organization like Uber, like Lyft, will have to contract with organizations that are tied to fraud, that are not acting in the responsible way for the people that they're supposed to represent. That is the entire purpose of what I believe this original language was designed to do, to advocate for people. That is what it appears to be written to do. But by writing it in a way that these organizations must contract with, providing a very narrow scope in the language, saying these are the organizations that you may interact with, that you actually may not, it's a must, you must interact with. We're providing you with very few avenues in which you can locate an organization that is not deeply embedded in fraud. People lining their own pockets, not for the benefit of the drivers, not for the benefit of the workers, not for the benefit of the people utilizing this service, but for the benefit of themselves. They can buy themselves some really cool cars, so their messages on WhatsApp can talk about how they're defrauding the system and they're gaining millions and millions and millions of dollars. Members, it is our responsibility here in the state of Minnesota to seek that out with a laser focus, understanding that every dollar that goes towards fraud, waste, and abuse is one less dollar that churns the economy of our state. It is completely and utterly irresponsible of us to mandate a private company do this. That a corporation should be forced by the state of Minnesota to entertain and interact with criminals. I get the idea. You know, there are probably language barriers. There's a lot of forms that need to be filled out. But find organizations that can do it the right way without enriching themselves. They should benefit the workers. That is, in my, as I'm reading this, that appears to be what the intent is. But instead, we're mandating fraud. And even if it's not taxpayer dollars, it's still somebody's dollars. It's the person who jumps in the vehicle and has to pay an extra charge because of this fraud. And it doesn't appear as though there's any negotiated wages, and I think there's only a couple organizations that would fulfill this very narrow scope. And so they can look at it and say, man, we can charge whatever we want. We can charge whatever we want because there's only a couple of us. We can strong-arm these guys at a rate that exceeds that which has already occurred here in the last weekend. Members, fraud, waste, and abuse is something that we should all agree is bad. And writing a piece of legislation designed to enrich someone else is entirely inappropriate. Let's delete this language. Let's curtail the fraud that is running rampant in this state. Let's be real here. The fraud that we are seeing in the state of Minnesota is akin to third world country fraud. We are seeing taxpayer dollars, we are seeing other individuals' dollars going into people's pockets for nothing, for achieving no good but their own personal enrichment. And I cannot believe that anyone would stand for that. This is what happens in an authoritarian government. People skimming off the top. Everyone gets their cut. This is what we're doing right now. We are designing legislation in which everyone gets their cut if you're in line. If the language is written in your way, you can just skim a couple bucks off the top, put it in your pocket, and no one's going to notice. Members, this is disgusting. Designing legislation to enrich an organization that is consistently lining their own pockets is the absolute wrong thing to do. Vote for this amendment. Remove this language. Actually, I'm wondering if the author of the amendment would yield to a question.
He will yield. Representative Olson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative Garofalo, for yielding. My question to you is, are there instances, is this well documented, the fraud that is occurring within the Somali community resettlement, the withdrawal of those bills over the last couple weeks in order to not spend taxpayer dollars? Is this, in your opinion, a backdoor in which we can continue to fund fraud, waste, and abuse here in the state of Minnesota?
Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Representative Olson, thank you for the question. The answer is that this is replacing public sector financed fraud with private sector mandated fraud. And so if you look on subdivision 4 of the bill, and I will just highlight on this page, members, and I know we say a lot of things here, but it's right here, folks, page 13, line 17, this precludes new groups from offering these services. So these essential services, translations, helping language barriers, line 13, or excuse me, page 13, line 17, Madam Speaker and Representative Olson, they have to be up and running for 2 years. So for anybody else to offer these services, they have to start up, sit idle for 2 years, not getting reimbursed, having to charge people for services, while these ones are not allowed to charge their services. Uber and rideshare riders are forced to pay for it, right? This eliminates the ability for other people to compete in this area. It's a no-bid fraud contract. That's what it is. It's right there. Now, there are, current events with regards to the Feeding Our Future scandal. These are all publicly available documents. There's no,
There's no excuse for people to say they don't know or they didn't know about this or understand it. Every member of the body is being informed about this right now. And it's right there, page 13, line 17. This is replacing a publicly financed fraud scheme with a private sector mandated fraud scheme. That's what this does.
Representative Olson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. This is just absolutely ridiculous that we would be purposely writing legislation to mandate fraud, to mandate it, to not provide any other options. We are writing language that is so narrow in scope that no one else can break into this except for those fraudulent organizations. Members, years ago, we started ringing alarm bells saying there's fraud here, things are being wasted, taxpayer dollars. And everyone else said, no fraud here, don't look over here, don't look over here. And now we are seeing one of the largest cases of fraud in the state of Minnesota's entire history. It could have been stopped. This can be stopped on day one. Today, this can be stopped. We can prevent a single dollar from being sent, wasted fraudulently. We can stop it today. This is your opportunity. We're ringing the alarm bells here. We're saying this is your opportunity to do the right thing, to remove this mandated fraud out of the language for the benefit of the workers, for the benefit of the drivers, for the benefit of those riding in these vehicles. Everyone wins except for the fraudulent actors who shouldn't win. They shouldn't win. But this language is written in a way in which they will be the winners. They will be the winners, and it will come out of our pockets. Members, it is time to do the right thing, to remove this language to ensure that our drivers are taken care of, that our riders are taken care of, and that the fraudulent actors are not given the greatest gift that the state of Minnesota could possibly give them. Vote for the Garofalo amendment. Remove this terribly fraudulent, wasteful language from this DE. Thank you, Madam Speaker and members.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I'm so troubled by this. It's shocking to me that all this work on the fix for Uber and Lyft, and part of the deal that gets the deal done is that we as a state are requiring that they have to contract with a group that is tied, not sort of tangentially, tied very directly and specifically to the Feeding Our Future scandal. Members, I've been concerned about fraud in state government since I was elected. Something I've cared about in different stages of my life in policy. Many years ago when I worked in Congress, I ran the Pork Busters Coalition, a bipartisan group in the U.S. Congress with former Representative Tim Penny and my boss, Harris Faywell. And we made some serious reforms that helped and now have since been abandoned. But for a while, we were doing pretty good work on identifying and getting rid of some fraud. When I came to the state legislature, I was honestly stunned at the complete lack of oversight of the grants that the state government puts out, lots of agencies. So I worked very hard in the interim, I can't remember which year now, with the OLA and came up with a bill. It's still out there, HF4746, that would set in place processes for ensuring that grants are accomplishing the mission, that the money is being well spent, that the financials are on the up and up, and that if there are problems, it's flagged in an enterprise-wide grants management system so that if one agency has a issue with fraud, that's flagged so all the other agencies knows this grantee has problems. Don't do business with them. That bill, by the way, has never had a hearing, even though I've been trying for years. Members, what we are doing here, like, this is so much worse than that. Like, we know this group is tied to the Feeding Our Future scandal, and not just a little bit. According to so there's been about 70 indictments or charges, and 10 more were just announced in February of this year. This is an ongoing prosecution and investigation of serious fraud. 10 more charges were levied or were brought forward by the U.S. Attorney in February. And this group, in the list of exhibits that federal prosecutors have used, is tied 40 times, members, to the Somali Community Resettlement Services operations in Minneapolis, Faribault, Rochester, and Wilmer. Among the evidence seized, according to this article, in one home, a check for $238,221 from the Somali Community Resettlement of Olmsted County. Members, there's active federal investigations and charges being brought against this group, and we are mandating in state statute that Uber and Lyft have to do business with this group. I find it appalling that we are mandating all these very specific things about micromanaging how businesses contract with them. But to then say, we are not only mandating how you run your business vis-a-vis your drivers, but we are also going to tell you who you have to contract with so your drivers can make appeals? The micromanagement here on its own merit is appalling. But then to add that we're micromanaging, that they have to contract with a group involved in federal fraud cases, and that's their only choice? I so appreciate, Representative Garofalo, that you brought this forward. I hope the public is watching. This is an egregious use of state power to benefit a group that is involved in fraud, and everyone should vote for the Garofalo amendment. Thank you, members.
The member from Itasca, Representative Igo.
Madam Speaker and members, thank you, Representative Garofalo, for bringing this amendment. This is just, we're at that weird part of session, and you'd expect that the bills going to be in front of us are just going to be doing what we have to do to make sure things continue. But then we see something like this, and Representative Garofalo drafted an amendment that was trying to reach towards that good government compromise and say, listen, we shouldn't have language saying must and join these advocacy groups, because it really is. It's forced fraud. What's also concerning to me is where this could go next. Because if we are going to force in a government mandate private sector contractors to be a part of things like this, where does it start and stop? And again, I think there's going to be a larger conversation to be had about what we're really doing inside this legislation. But as just to the amendment, let's try to do at least a little step right here to make sure we are practicing good government. I don't need to repeat the talking points my colleagues have already went over. This is public data that's out there that this is going to be ripe for fraud and abuse, and is essentially eliminating free markets. That 2-year window that you have to operate before you can contract. I mean, it's boxing everyone out. It's government picking the winners and the losers, which that really isn't a Republican or Democrat thing. We all agree that no one should be picking winners and losers. But then why is that in the bill in front of us? This is about looking out for the future of what business looks like in the state of Minnesota. If we continue to allow this sort of rampant activist type legislation to be coming into our bills and becoming laws in the state of Minnesota, we're going to continue to create a business climate in communities that aren't going to prosper, that aren't going to give us that life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness that we are guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution. We need to think twice and act once on this. It's just baffling to me that we even have to sit here and to debate this. I mean, when we've got a handout on our desk right now, basically talking about how this is just going to feed fraud, and an amendment that is seeking to delete 14 lines. It's not going after any other part of the bill. This isn't trying to add anything major. It's just trying to hone in, clean it up, and make sure we do it right, because that's what we were elected to do. But instead, we need to sit here and have this debate now, and try to explain to everybody just the press, and that's probably the point that I'm probably most hung up about, is the precedent that we're going to be setting with this. I mean, if we can start dictating private sector contractors and the companies they work for and how they must join groups X, Y, and Z, where do we start and stop then? Is this opening the floodgates? And I would think that business outside of the issue that we're talking about, private sector unions outside the area of what we're talking about, are probably watching this and going, whoa, slow down, pump the brakes. So because we have 12 hours and 7 minutes remaining in actually 6 minutes remaining in our session, we shouldn't be doing something this drastic that we haven't had chance to vet with all the other stakeholders and have input from our constituents and from communities. And for people to actually make sure and vet this, that this isn't going to be setting a precedent that is going to shake the foundations of our economy, of our free markets, of business. I'll preface again, this isn't a delete all amendment to kill the bill and stop it. This is asking to delete 14 lines of language so that we don't fund private sector fraud and we don't create a system that'll run out of control and shake the very foundations of what we all believe in and what makes our communities thrive. And that is having free market economies that are able to prosper and support our communities. Please vote for the amendment.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Nadeau.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I honestly, I can't even believe that we're discussing this. I can't believe that we didn't adopt this. This is bad when counties do this. It's bad when cities do this. It's 3 times as bad when the state does it, when it basically mandates contracts with certain providers, be it nonprofit, for-profit. It lacks all transparency, any accountability. I mean, and just on the simple reading of this, it must contract with a driver's advocacy organization. I mean, if that driver's advocacy organization decided that in order to contract with the network that they're going to charge $5 million, there's nothing that the network can do. And when you go down further, I mean, if you're a lawyer, you're going to love this. I mean, because the driver advocacy groups, they must provide at no cost assistance with under 3 other technical or legal assistance. I mean, this is awesome for the litigators out there. I mean, this is a moneymaker, and they can just turn around and bill the network for whatever those costs are, because the drivers are held harmless. There's no accountability between the drivers, and I know that we're talking about fraud over here, and I'm not going to do that. This is just a bad business idea. I cannot believe that Uber Lyft agreed to this. I just don't believe it, Madam Speaker. Is there Madam Speaker, I don't know who to ask this question to. Can I, will the author yield for a question? The author of the amendment.
The author is Representative Garofalo. Will you yield? Representative Garofalo. He will yield. Representative Nadeau.
Will he yield? I didn't hear.
He will yield.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative Garofalo. Do you know, Representative Garofalo, I heard somebody, and I don't know if it was our side or the author of the underlying bill, mention that all parties to this have agreed to this document. Is there any documentation that you've seen where the network providers have agreed to this section?
Representative Garofalo.
Madam Speaker, Representative Nadeau, I will take the descriptions of this bill at face value that Uber and Lyft will continue operating in the state of Minnesota.
Representative Nadeau, I would just highlight to you that the language in subdivision 4 is very shrewdly written, okay? We cannot get up here and say that these two individual entities must be contracted with. We can't say that because it's very shrewdly written. But what it does say is it says, an organization must have been established and operating in Minnesota continuously for 2 years. Okay, so that's what it says. So if someone's going to start up a new company to compete with this, a new nonprofit, they would have to charge people for a service that they were already receiving for free from reimbursement. And if you're wondering why the 2 years is relevant, okay, Molda was incorporated in June of 22. Okay, that's why it's 2 years. So I can't stand up here and say it has to be these two entities. However, in the language, it is very shrewdly written to require that a group that is currently adjacent to the federal feeding, the largest COVID fraud in the nation, and an advocacy group that was incorporated 2 years next month, those are the ones that are giving a regulatory preference and to take revenue streams that historically have been competitive that would allow others to into. This is gatekeeping and keeps them out. And so it's an alternate revenue stream to these nonprofits, one of which has in documented federal cases, a very strong association with the largest COVID fraud in the nation.
Representative Nadeau.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Garofalo. I know that where I work, this would never happen. This can't happen. You can't write a single source contract like this. No one would do it. Members, seriously, let's adopt the Garofalo amendment and move on and discuss the rest of this bill. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Washington, Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I also serve on the Legislative Audit Commission with Representative Quam and Representative Jacobs, and 3 members on the, there we go, 3 members on the Democrat side from the House, and the same in the Senate. And this has been a huge issue for us. And I want to start out, first of all, I'm really proud to serve on the Legislative Audit Commission. It is a very nonpartisan group. The members that are on there are concerned about doing things right in the state of Minnesota. They're concerned about stopping fraud. They're concerned about stopping waste and abuse. And we're all of the same mind. It is not partisan. It's good government. And I can tell you that I have been shocked since I've come back into elected office in the last 2 years about how much fraud has occurred that would have never, ever happened 10 or 20 years, ever. Minnesota used to be a clean government state. We were very proud of having good government. And even a little minor thing out there would have made headlines, top of the fold headlines. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Top of the fold headlines in the past, even minor things. But we've seen in the last, since COVID really, and maybe before, but since COVID, we have seen just huge cases of fraud. Nation-leading cases of fraud. And it isn't just Feeding Our Future. There's been others, many others. And I feel like that this is turning into a mob state or something, where we have organizations that are defrauding the government, nonprofit organizations, defrauding the government, defrauding the taxpayers, probably defrauding the people that are using their services. And go back to Feeding Our Future, weren't they supposed to feed these kids, right? They weren't, not at all. So this provision essentially legislates that the government, through our legislation, it legislates that Uber and Lyft and all of the drivers, have to use a fraudulent company. And it's apparent to me that this is a way to replace the income that they're not going to get from the millions of dollars in nonprofit grants that were originally in legislation and were pulled. Incredible, incredible that even happened. And thank goodness that they were pulled, and probably just about everyone in this chamber is happy about that and supported that, because that was wrong. We need to stop the fraud in Minnesota. We have to stop it. And this is not a Republican issue. This is a bipartisan issue, and it should be led by members on the Audit Commission, and not just on my side of the aisle. And I've got to believe, members, that this is going to be a debate like this in the Senate when this comes before them, because there are good people on both sides of the aisle that want to stop fraud in government. We cannot let a bill like this pass without pulling out a provision that forces private companies and Uber drivers, to get involved in companies that are essentially using mob tactics in the state. It's wrong. We all know it's wrong, and it's got to stop. Thank you.
Member from Anoka, Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I emailed out to you an article from the Center for the American Experiment just now. It's dated April 16th, 2024. It's a 3-page article, so I thought I would save the paper and just email it to you. But the headline for the article is Prominent Nonprofit Linked to Feeding Our Future Case. And it says, the lead paragraph says, although neither the organization nor any of its staff have been charged with or accused of any wrongdoing, the nonprofit Somali Community Resettlement Services appears in a recently filed Feeding Our Future trial document some 43 times. Now at our house we are fans of Scooby-Doo, and to this lead paragraph we would say, ruh-roh. The document list is the exhibit list was submitted on April 2nd, and it's quite lengthy. But if you go down a couple of paragraphs, it says the Somali Community Resettlement Services. It was originally in Olmsted County, but it has since moved to Minneapolis. And the main office there, the paragraph right above the photo of their headquarters says the main office for Somali Community Resettlement Services of Olmsted, Resettlement Services has moved to Minneapolis and is now located in the Gale Mansion, a historic property built by the Pillsbury family that the nonprofit purchased in October 22 for $2.6 million. Pretty swank home office there in historic Minneapolis. And it goes on to talk about the possible connections of the what we'll call an acronym, and they use it in the article, is the SCRS. And so it lays out there some really interesting possible connections. And again, as we know, because we still have a senator that's been charged with a felon, and she's still, innocent until proven guilty, so she can go ahead and take on everything that she's been taking on in her roles until she has a trial. So the SCRS is also, innocent until proven guilty. But on the second page, it says the second SCRS feeding site mentioned in the trial document listed is located in Faribault. The first one is located in Minneapolis on Minnehaha Avenue. The third cited in the court documents is in Rochester. And also mentioned is one of their food distribution sites in Minneapolis and one in Wilmar. So all told, the name Somali Community Resettlement appears on the exhibit list over 40 times. I encourage you to read on to that article, some information about some of the politicians that this organization has donated to. But members, this is a lot of red flags going off all at once. And although in the bill language, as Representative Garofalo has pointed out, this organization is not explicitly listed, they are currently, last we knew, contracting with one of the rideshare services here in Minnesota. What I don't know is how many organizations, that meet this criteria that is very, as Representative Garofalo said, very shrewdly mentioned or outlined on page 13 of the bill. We don't know how many other organizations would meet that criteria other than the Somali Community Resettlement Organization. Would Representative Hassan, the bill's author, yield to a question?
She will yield. Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Hassan, I see on page 13 there, we've got some really specific requirements. It has to be a Minnesota company that they must contract with, and they have to have been doing business in the state of Minnesota for at least 2 years, and they must be capable of providing culturally competent driver preservation services, outreach, and education. Representative Hassan, do you know how many organizations currently in Minnesota that would meet that criteria there happen to be in, that these organizations, the driver services companies could contract with?
Representative Hassan.
Madam Speaker, Representative Scott, we have been hearing about fraud, waste, and abuse in Somali resettlement agencies. I just want to put it on the record that this bill has nothing to do with Somali resettlement agents. If Uber has a currently contract with Somali resettlement agents, then maybe we should talk to Uber and ask those questions, because this bill specifically does have nothing to do with that. It does say in here that we have to get a driver and a nonprofit partnering up with Uber and Lyft to help with deactivation, translation, and support for drivers. This language was drafted with the help of the commissioner, the TNCs, the drivers, as well as the legislators that were sitting at the table. So we have been talking about fraud, waste, and abuse, and an entity that has nothing to do with this language, with this bill. So I would love to have a conversation about the bill and not some entity out there that has nothing to do with this bill. Thank you.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, Representative Hassan, I didn't hear an answer to my question there. I heard you say that the Somali Community Resettlement Services is not mentioned in the bill, and you'd like to talk about the bill, but according to, well, Representative Garofalo, would you yield for a question? Madam Speaker, would Representative Garofalo will yield to a question.
He will yield. Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Garofalo, which one of the driver services companies is, if you know, currently contracting with Somali Community Resettlement Services?
Representative Garofalo.
Madam Speaker and members, my understanding is that there's a voluntary contract right now with Uber. But the way this bill is written is that that would no longer be a voluntary agreement for any rideshare company. They must do it, and they must do it with companies that have specific criteria. And that criteria is laid out in the bill. Again, very, very shrewdly written to say that it's not mandating they work with a certain nonprofit, but narrowing the field, eliminating competition, and setting up gatekeeping so these rideshare organizations would be forced to partner with these nonprofits.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Garofalo. So, Representative Hassan, you just heard that right now, Uber has a voluntary contract with the Somali Community Resettlement Services. So to say that they're in no way related to this bill is not a true statement. That's not a true statement. If they have a voluntary, right now, contract with this organization. So would Representative Hassan yield to a question?
She will yield. Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Hassan, I'm really trying to get to the bottom of this. Do you know of other organizations that would fit the criteria that is in the bill in the section for the amendment that would remove that section?
Representative Hassan.
Madam Speaker and Rep. Scott, the definition says the organization must have been established and operating in Minnesota continuously for the last 2 years and is capable of providing culturally competent driver representation services, outreach, and education. I can tell you 1,000 organizations that can fit into this description. Thank you.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. 1,000 of organizations that would fit the bill that have been doing business in Minnesota for 2 years that have experience in this area? Madam Speaker, would Representative Hassan continue to yield?
She will yield. Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Hassan, could you name 4 of those organizations for us? If there are thousands, could you name 4? I mean, that'd be a small number out of 1,000, right?
Representative Hassan.
Madam Speaker, Rep. Scott, I would love to have a conversation about the compensation on this bill, the protection, the driver, pay, everything on this bill. This section that we're hanging up right now is a small part of the bill that is so insignificant that we're wasting our time. We should put our debate on something that really, truly matters. What matters is that we're going to keep Uber and Lyft in the state of Minnesota. They will be operating in the state of Minnesota. We're going to pay these drivers that are here with us a fair pay. We're going to stop exploitation. That is what matters, and that's the conversation I'm willing to have. Other than that, I don't know. We can go on and on and on about things that are hypothetical, but I want to have a real debate about what's in this bill. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, Representative Hassan, I still didn't hear you name only 4 out of thousands nonprofits that would fit the bill. And I understand that the entire bill is before us, but we're on this amendment right now. It's in the bill. And for you to say it's not a significant part of the bill is, well, then why is it in here? Then you should all vote to remove it if it's not a significant part of the bill. So I'm guessing the board is going to light up green on this amendment. Members, feeding our future that we know of, $250 million bucks, taxpayer money wasted. So I don't think we're wasting our time on this section. I ask you to name at least 4 nonprofits that would fit the description laid out in this section, and you were not able to do that. We're just trying to prevent future fraud. And members, this is the other reason to bring up and focus on this section is its precedent setting. The line, if this bill passes, can you imagine the line of organizations that are going to demand to partner with nonprofits for their employment benefits? For the same thing. Would Representative Hassan yield to another question, Madam Speaker?
Yes, she will yield. Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Hassan, where else in statute do we require a private business to contract with a nonprofit?
Representative Hassan.
Madam Speaker, Rep. Scott, you can look that up. You don't need me to answer that for you. But what I want to answer is what this bill is. This bill is about justice. It's about fair pay. It's about worker protection. Thank you.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, Representative Hassan, we just want to make sure it's not going to be about fraud someday. Members, we need to support the Garofalo amendment. Oh my gosh. Not to do so is a dereliction of duty on all of our parts. A dereliction of duty for a couple of reasons, right? Preventing the fraud and the precedent that this would set. Please support the Garofalo amendment.
Majority Leader Long.
Madam Speaker, I move that House File 4746 as amended be laid on the table.
Majority Leader Long moves that House File 4746 as amended be laid on the table. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion prevails.